Sława everyone, Sława Bogom, and welcome in the first episode of the third season of Searching for the Slavic Soul. If you listen to the last episode of the second season of this podcast, you already know that this season, the third season of this podcast, will be a summary of the second and the third tome of Kultura Ludowa Słowian, which means folk culture of the Slavs, a monumental ethnographic work by Polish ethnographer and folklorist Kazimierz Moszynski. Kultura Ludowa Słowian is one of the most important studies in Slavic ethnography. Its three tomes were published between 1929 and 1939 and were the first comprehensive overview of the folk culture of a large European ethnic group of the Slavs. The first tome of Kultura Ludowa Słowian deals with the material culture of the Slavs, and the second and the third tomes, the ones I will be summarizing in this season, they deal with the spiritual culture of the Slavs. The titles of the second and the third tomes of Kultura Ludowa Słowian are Kultura Duchowa, which means spiritual culture, of course, of the Slavs. And because there are two tomes on this topic, on the topic of spiritual culture, and these tomes are called Kultura Duchowa, in the whole season I will be referring to the second tome of Kultura Ludowa Słowian as the first tome of Kultura Duchowa, or spiritual culture, and to the third tome of Kultura Ludowa Słowian as the second tome of Kultura Duchowa, or spiritual culture. The reason why I decided to summarize the two tomes of spiritual culture of the Slavs is because after dealing with pseudo-pagan folklore for years, I think I finally realized why this folklore is selling, despite being obviously stupid and totally fake. And I think that the reason is that the Western, the weird people like WERD people, they have no idea about the Slavic state of mind, the Slavic point of view, and the Slavic spirituality, and hence they are buying whatever is labeled as Slavic, because not having any understanding of what is Slavic, they cannot tell what is Slavic and what is not. So I decided to explain it to you by summarizing the most comprehensive, in-depth and evidence-based study of Slavic spirituality, which is Moszynski's spiritual culture of the Slavs. What is important to note here is that the spiritual culture which Moszynski studied is not the spiritual culture or spirituality that you know from the New Age BS presented on social media as spirituality. Spiritual culture studied by Moszynski is every single part of the culture that is not material. So basically everything that is not building houses, building boats, making tools or making clothes, and etc. It's basically all of that is not this is spiritual, and it is spiritual because it's the fruit of psychological, of mental activity of humans. Spiritual culture is what we know, is how we know it, is how we see it, how we perceive relationships between us and the world. It is our values, it is our beliefs, beliefs related to religion, but also related to what we believe is true. So spiritual culture involves mathematics, stargazing, the way we think the world is built, and the way we think it functions. It involves how we feel, how we see, how we understand and share all of this with other people. It also involves mythology, medicine, fortune-telling, storytelling, music, art, literature, and symbols. So what I am trying to say here is that it is going to be a long season. The 2 tomes of Kultura Duchowa is around 1700 pages altogether. Originally, the plan was to summarize around 100 pages per episode, but it is likely to be less than that, maybe 60 or 80 pages per episode. Since to some of the topics I will want to pay more attention to make sure I summarize all the important bits, not only some of the important bits. But before we start, I want to say a few words about Kazimierz Moszynski and give you some historical background of the tomes I will be summarizing in the 3rd season of Searching for the Slavic Soul. So Kazimierz Moszynski was born in Warsaw in 1887. Back then, roughly 100 years after partition of Poland by Russia, Germany and Austria, Poland did not exist and Warsaw was in Russia. So Moszynski spoke Polish, which he was taught at home. He spoke Russian, which he was taught at school. He also spoke German, enough to study in Switzerland. And because of the normal, typical back then, classic education, he knew, at least on a reading level, Latin and Greek. And because of his interest in Slavic linguistics, he must have known Old Church Slavonic as well as several other Slavic languages and their dialects. As far as ethnography, linguistics and folklore go, he was pretty much self-taught. His formal education was in biology, which he studied in Switzerland, and in art. He attended Jan Matejko Academy of Fine Arts in Kraków, where he studied drawing under Józef Mehofer, a distinguished painter and one of the most, if not the most revered Polish artists of the early 20th century. While he was studying at the Academy of Fine Arts, Moszynski wanted to create a drama about the struggle of Slavic pagans against the Christianity, and he decided that in order to do that, he has to collect source material to inform the drama. In order to collect the source material, he started to work as a private tutor for the children of landlords in rural areas. And in his free time, when he was not tutoring the children, he started reading extensively on ethnology, sociology, philosophy, linguistics, and archaeology, while he was conducting field work, gathering ethnographic material via conversations with the peasants and through participation in their culture. And that was in 1912. Moszynski, he never completed the drama he set up to create, but instead he spent the rest of his life, and he died in 1959. He spent his life researching the culture, language, and history of the Slavs. He lived through 2 wars. He joined the Polish military as a volunteer. He was rewarded with Krzyż Walecznych, which is Cross of Valor, which in Poland is the 2nd highest individual military decoration for battlefield bravery. If you're interested, the highest Polish military decoration is War Order of Virtuti Militari, which to be rewarded, it requires not only battlefield bravery, but also self-sacrifice for Poland. So, as you can see, Moszynski's life story was anything but obvious, and it does show in his writing. I do read a lot, including academic writings, and Moszynski's work truly stands out. Despite being very highly educated, he's very humble. Most certainly, he's not an elitist. He has this amazing ability of looking at the so-called high and low culture through the same set of standards. He appreciates insight, curiosity, and intelligence, regardless of whether they are expressed with posh grammar and syntax, or with simple phrases and without the quote-unquote correct vocabulary. He criticizes stupidity and intellectual laziness wherever he sees it, regardless of whether it's coming from the highest echelons of academia or from a humble hut in the boonies. Although, and that he notices quite often, stupidity and intellectual laziness are not features that one can get away as easily if one lives in the boonies. Definitely not as easily as it is to get away with it if one lives in the highest echelons of academia. Moszynski also uses truly beautiful Polish. His writing is expressive without being too poetic, and it's very clear without being too clinical. I would say that if you read Polish, you should absolutely read Moszynski's Kultura Ludowa Słowian, even just to enjoy the language. But if you don't, the season 3 of Searching for the Slavic Soul is your second best bet to truly understand the Slavic soul. And also, I want to stress one very important point of which you might not be aware. What Moszynski recorded in Kultura Duchowa is as close as anyone really, living in the 21st century can get to the state of knowledge or understanding of the world the medieval and early medieval Slavic pagans had. Between the 19th or 20th century, when Moszynski gathered material for spiritual culture of the Slavs, and say the 5th or the 10th or the 12th century, when pagan Slavs actually lived openly pagan lives in openly pagan societies, there has obviously been some technological progress, but it wasn't nowhere near as paradigm changing as the technological progress that happened between the 19th and the 21st century. To give you an idea of the life of pre-industrial Slavs, in his field research, Moszynski experienced and recorded a world with no cars, no radio, no electricity, no TV, no phones, no refrigeration, no washing machines, no plumbing of any sort, be it indoors or outdoors, no supermarkets, no modern medicine, no state social help of any type, no public education, with illiteracy being the normal thing, and knowing how to read and write being a rarely seen sign of education. He even found places with no watches or clocks. Comparing to the pre-Christian Slavs, the Slavic people whom Moszynski studied, they had better building technology, more advanced agrarian technology, or better tools, which Moszynski recorded in the first tome of the folk culture of the Slavs, where he wrote about the material culture. But as far as communication technology, the level of education, or the concepts of acting and interacting with the world, the Slavs whom Moszynski studied were really not that far off from our ultimate ancestors, the pre-Christian pagan Slavs. And this is why the 2 tomes of spiritual culture of the Slavs are so important as a way to embody, to really grasp on spiritual level the Slavic Native Faith. So, having said all of that, let's start the summary. Today I will be summarizing pages 1 to 41 of the first tome of Kultura Duchowa Słowian, or Spiritual Culture of the Slavs. Hopefully in the next episodes I will be able to go through more pages, but with today's long introduction, the time is more limited. The pages I will be summarizing today are dedicated to Slavic cosmography, which is basically how pre-industrial Slavs thought the cosmos is built, and a little bit about telling the time of the year or the time of the day. And just one last thing before I get into the topic. To make it easier, everything I will say in the rest of the podcast is what Moszynski wrote in Kultura Duchowa. And if I will want to add something that's not in the book, I will make it clear. And when I say that Slavs this or Slavs that, by Slavs, I mean the people who lived in the pre-industrial rural areas of the Slavdom, where Moszynski conducted his research. So, Slavic cosmography. Slavs most commonly believed that the earth is flat and is sort of an island floating on top of a body of water, which makes total sense because where the Slavs lived, if you dug deep enough into the ground, there was water underneath, and if you went far enough on the ground, you would always end up with a body of water at the end of the land. Slavs mostly did not think that the earth was lying on something or that it was supported by anything. Only in the most southern part of Slavdom, where, as Moszynski convincingly explains, under the influence of ancient Greece, there was a concept of one or several bulls supporting the earth from underneath. But the belief of the core Slavic lands, like the land of modern Poland or Ukraine, the belief there that the earth is flat and that it floats on a body of water. The Slavs believed that the floating earth is covered by a dome of the sky, which separates Earth from some unspecified space where there is a lot of light. Slavs believed that the stars are holes in this dome, and this is why the stars shine so bright. In some parts of Slavdom, the sun was also seen as a hole in this dome, but most common belief was that the sun was moving independently of the dome of the sky, and in the night the sun was hiding under the earth, submerged in the body of water. The most common belief was that the dome is supported by a huge pole or a pillar that stands in the middle of the world and around which the sky, so the dome, turns. Moszynski cites a 62-year-old peasant woman from a village not far from Płock, who, when Moszynski asked her, "How did old people say the sky turns and what does it turn on?" she, the older woman, replied that there is a huge pole in the middle of the world and the sky turns around it. And some Slavs in the northern and western part of Slavdom, they thought that the sky is not supported by a pillar, but it hangs on a nail. But Moszynski stresses that it's definitely the belief of minority, and that it is very likely influenced by the beliefs of cultures north from the Slavs, so cultures like the Balts or the Norse, also known as the Scandinavians. The pole or the pillar that supports the sky is called pępek nieba, which means the belly button of the sky, or pępek ziemi, so the belly button of the earth. And that is important because the phrase pępek ziemi, so the belly button of the earth, is a very common motif in the Slavic zamawianie or zagovory, which is the most common type of Slavic magic. I talked about zamawianie in the episode 14th of the first season of Searching for the Slavic Soul, so I will not be talking about it here today. but I will just link to this episode in the notes. However, as we are going to be summarizing Moszynski's work, we will be talking about it more in the future episodes. And as far as the cardinal directions, the east, west, north, and south, Slavs saw it and still see it as literally sides of the world, which is strony świata in Polish, for example. The pan-Slavic sides of the world are the east and the west. They both called the rise of the sun, as in sunrise, and the setting of the sun, so the sunset. For example, in Polish, Białorusian, or in Slovene, the west is called Zachód, and in Russian and Bulgarian is called Zapad, which both literally mean walking down or falling down. East is called Wschód, Vostok, or Istok, which mean the walking up or climbing up, and it's not a verb but a noun. The north and the south are not so obvious. In many modern Slavic languages, they mean half of the day or half of the night, like, for example, in Polish, południe and północ, which literally are half of the day and half of the night. But the oldest Slavic name of the north is Sever, which was preserved in Russian as north, and is also the name of a cold northern wind. For the south, the oldest Slavic, so the south like the cardinal direction of south, the oldest Slavic name was Yug, which was also preserved in Russian and is also the name of the warm southern wind. What is important about the sides of the world is that they are being bowed to during many Slavic rituals related to both religion and to magic. Another thing that is important regarding the sun is that the Slavs knew very well that the sun has two paths, the low path in the winter and the high path in the summer. They knew that the sun rises in different parts of the sky depending on the time of the year. The winter sunrise was called little sunrise, and the summer sunrise was called the big sunrise. And they also knew that if you face the part of the sky in which the sun rises, then the sun always stays on the right of the right side of the sky, and that is important because walking with the sun in such way that you circle things with the center of the circle on your right, so nowadays we would say clockwise. So walking with the sun, which you could also say it's walking the path of the sun, is very often seen in Slavic rituals, and that's the fact of walking with the sun. It's meaningful in these rituals. As to the night sky, Slavs did not actually pay as much attention to it as, say, the ancient Greeks or the Scandinavians. The Slavs mostly paid attention to the moon, the Milky Way, to the planet Venus, and the constellations of Orion and Pleiades, however you say it. Because Moszynski conducted his fieldwork at the times when clocks and watches were quite popular, he had to visit quite remote places to study the significance of the observation of the sky to the Slavs. But he did manage to collect a lot of material and writes extensively on how accurate was the Slavs' knowledge on the movements of celestial bodies. And he writes that they were able to tell the time of the year and the time of the day and night quite precisely, basing exclusively on the observation of the sky, which in my opinion is the coolest thing ever. Particularly given that we are talking about a population that did not get much or did not get any schooling, could barely read or could not read at all. didn't have any telescopes, binoculars, nor did they have any scientists or mathematicians to be able to measure the position of the stars or of the sun. Everything that they knew, it was passed in oral tradition from one generation to another. What Moszynski makes absolutely clear is that among the uneducated Slavs with no access to clocks, watches, or calendars, the time is not measured, it is counted. According to Slavs, in Slavs' beliefs, only the space is measured, and the time cannot be measured, it can only be counted, which, let me add it from myself, so this is my opinion, not Moszynski. It is actually a beautiful way to look at it, because you only count things that are made of units, are finite, and are valuable in themselves. So you count eggs, you count cattle, loaves of bread. You measure things that are an undefined part of something larger. So you measure the distance on a field, or you measure the length of fabric or the length of a string. But the time is not an undefined part of something larger. The time is finite and is very valuable in itself. So this is why you count it, to make sure you will not miss a beat. So that's the end of my comment, and we're going back to Moszynski now. So, like, if you lived among pre-Christian Slavs or pre-industrial Slavs, you would count the position of the sun, of the moon, or, say, the belt of the Orion. So you would say that the sun is halfway through its path, or you will count the life of the moon, like literally, because when the crescent of the moon is waxing, so it's getting bigger, Slavs would say that the moon has been born, and as it is filling up, they would say that it's a young moon and that it's growing up. The full moon was and still is called in Polish, for example, pełnia, which means fullness. And after the full moon, the moon is aging until it dies. So that's according to Slavs. So when the moon dies, it's dead for 3 days, which is correct because the new moon, the phase of the new moon lasts around 3 days. And when the moon is dead, it was called zmiana or przemiana, which means just change. With time, there occurred a semantic shift, and now the 3 days when the moon is not visible, or according to our ancestors, when it's dead, these 3 days are now called nów, which is actually consistent with the English nomenclature, because nów means something new, and in English, nów is called new moon. So the description of the young reborn moon was moved to the previous phase, when the moon is not new yet, but is actually dead. As to the name of the moon, the Pan-Slavic name is miesiąc, which means a month, which not only Moszynski, but pretty much all Slavic linguists are sure that the name of the moon, so miesiąc, is the root of the name for the period of time. So first, the moon was named as miesiąc, and then the month was named as miesiąc, like following the moon, because a month is a period of time roughly equal to the time it takes the moon to be born, to live, and to die. The word miesiąc, in the name of the moon, not in the name of the month, is derived from the word mieniać or mienić, which they both mean to change, but also they mean to shimmer, since shimmering means changing in the intensity of the light. In Polish, The moon is also called księżyc, which originates from the word książę, which means prince. In Old Polish, but also among the Eastern Slavs and some Southern Slavs, the alternative name for the moon is łuna, which means light. And in some Slavic dialect, the moon is also called świtło or svetiło, which also means light or to light, as in to emit light. As to the Milky Way, all Slavs knew and recognized it on the sky, and pretty much all Slavs saw it as a path or a way, but not as a way made of milk, but a way to the afterworld or other world. Slavs believed that birds take the Milky Way to fly to Navia for winter, because Slavs knew that some birds migrate, but they didn't know where, so they believed that birds flew to Navia. And since the Milky Way was the way to Navia, Slavs also believed that the dead also traveled to Navia on the Milky Way. The exception of the concept of Milky Way as a way to Navia were Slovenians, Serbo-Croats and Bulgarians, who saw the Milky Way as a part of the sky that was covered with straw or hay, which, according to mythical explanations, was supposed to spill out of a bag carried or transported by a thief who stole the straw or hay. According to Moszynski, this concept originates from the area of Mediterranean Sea and apparently can also be found in the Middle East. As to the planet Venus, Slavs did not actually see it as one entity. They treated Venus in the morning as one thing and Venus in the evening as a separate thing. So there was the morning star and the evening star. The evening star, in Slavs' understanding, had a relation with the moon. Most commonly was seen as a servant of the moon. It was also a very common belief in Poland that the evening star, as she was often called wieczernica, which means a female entity that belongs to the evening. So it was a common belief that wieczernica was also the star that shone for the wild animals. Hence she was also called zwierzonka, which means a female entity that belongs to wild animals. The Venus that was visible in the morning, so in Slavs' understanding the morning star, was called jutrznia or jutrzenka, from the word utro or jutro, which both mean morning. In other parts of the Slavdom, she was also called Zorza, Zaria, or Zoria, which, depending on who you ask, either comes from the word żar, which means the glow of a really hot fire, or from the word żreć, which means to see. And I am just going to comment here, because Moszynski does not mention it, because he is a respectable scholar of Slavic studies, and no respectable scholar of Slavic studies has ever considered Zorza, Zaria, Zoria, or Jutrzenka to be a Slavic goddess. Not a single one. The idea that Zorza, Zaria, Zoria, or Jutrzenka was a Slavic goddess is pure folklore. It's made up in modern times by attention-craving morons who do not know shit. There is simply zero evidence of such a goddess ever existing, and any pseudo-mythology made up around Zorza, Zaria, Zoria, or Jutrzenka is pure fiction, allegedly reconstructed from, wait for it, from reconstructed pre-Indo-European mythology. So, basically, what happened here was that Ivan Zarubin, a scholar of Iranian studies, he attempted to reconstruct pre-Indo-European mythology. In order to do that, he looked at Indo-European mythology and tried to walk it back to reconstruct the original pre-Indo-European beliefs, which is basically like looking at the bones of dinosaurs and frogs and try to reconstruct how the common ancestor of dinosaurs and frogs looked. And, maybe you can make an educated guess about a common ancestor in such way, but unless you find the bones of the common ancestor, you really don't know how accurate your educated guess is. But then a whole bunch of morons decided that they take the reconstructed, so hypothetical, not certain, that they take these hypothetical pre-Indo-European beliefs and they walk it forward to reconstruct whole bunch of allegedly Slavic pantheon. It is like taking your educated guess regarding the common ancestor of dinosaurs and frogs and then, basing on this educated guess, attempt to reconstruct how a completely unknown, never heard of, and 100% extinct cousin of platypus looked. This is beyond moronic. That is a level of cretinism that can't even be measured. And it most certainly is pseudoscience because it's 100% and totally unverifiable. Because the pantheon of Slavic goddesses, if it ever existed, is as extinct as the hypothetical cousin of platypus. There is no evidence to which this reconstruction of a reconstruction can be compared, which makes the hypothesis unverifiable, which, by the very standards of science, makes it pseudoscientific, made-up folklore. And that was my rant, and I get back to Moszynski and the night sky. I was talking about the night sky. So we talked about Venus. We have already talked about Venus, and now there is only the Pleiades. I don't even know how to say it. Pleiades? I'm going to link up to this name so you will know how to spell it. And to the group of stars popularly known as Seven Sisters, and the belt of Orion. So that's the only these two left. And I'm going to summarize these two together since Slavs use them both to tell the time of the year. And Moszynski explains at length why is that. In summary, these two constellations are not visible all year round, like in the northern hemisphere. And the times when they are visible kind of coincide with the changes of seasons. Hence, these constellations are used as an indicator of when to start or finish harvest or when to start sowing the winter grains and such. So these constellations are super helpful for farmers, and hence they are well known all throughout the Slavdom. And what's interesting is that the Northern Star actually was not very well known to the Slavs. Moszynski himself seems to be surprised by his finding. And in several places he mentions that the Slavs do not seem to be paying any attention to the Northern Star. Some of the people he interviewed did not even realize that there is a star on the sky that does not move. So that's a side note for these who have ever encountered any sort of Northern Star related allegedly Slavic folklore. As to the constellation of Orion, Slavs typically only talk about what we know as the belt of Orion. Basically, they do not see the Orion. They see, depending on the sharpness of their vision, either 3 or 6 stars positioned in one line, which they called kosy, which means sides, like the things that you use to cut harvest, or grass. And the name for these 3 stars, the belt of Orion, is kosarze or kośniki, which means reapers or mowers. And the reason for that is that these 3 or 6 stars are positioned in one straight line, just as the reapers stand when they mow or reap the harvest. And since Orion shows on the night sky just before the harvest needs to be started, so it's not surprising that the Slavs made an association between the process of harvesting and the 3 or 6 stars that are lined up. As to the Pleiades, however you say it, I know how to say it in Polish. In Polish you say it Plejady, but I don't know how to pronounce it in English. So as to the constellation of 7 sisters, they are seen by the Slavs in 4 different ways. The most common, but not universal, way is seeing them as baby or babki, which means older woman, and that's in plural, which makes sense because there's 7 stars in this constellation. Another way of seeing this constellation is as kurki or kwoczki, which means a group of hens, or as in like female chickens. Another way is sito or rzeszoto, which are 2 different names for a sieve. And the 4th name is wołosożar, wołosożar, or wołostożar, which Moszynski calls the oldest of all these 4 ways of seeing this constellation. Moszynski also mentions that in various areas of Slavdom, the name wołosożar or similar, they are used as the name of Orion's belt, and in the very few regions that recognize the northern star is called stożar. And now, stożar means a pole or a pillar, and wołostożar means a pole or a pillar to which cattle is tied up. So Moszynski hypothesizes that maybe at some point the concept of the pole or a pillar holding up the sky was combined with some star at the end of the pole, but because Slavs did not pay attention to the northern star, the name was given to Pleiade, to the constellation of 7 sisters. But because Moszynski is a decent scholar, he does make it clear that is only a guess and that there is not much evidence and certainly no solid evidence supporting this hypothesis. And that is basically it with regards to the summary of the first 41 pages of Kultura Duchowa. So the spiritual culture of the Slavs, obviously. There is one conclusion that I would like to draw before I end this episode, and I do want to make it crystal clear that this is my conclusion, not Moszynski's conclusion, because Moszynski just summarizes his findings and really does not elaborate on how these findings should be applied in real-life reconstruction of Slavic Native Faith, which is not surprising because at the times of Moszynski, being a pagan, following a pagan faith was seen as the most regressive and totally ridiculous thing to do. In his days, it was mostly about preserving the history and the dying out culture of the Slavs, as a way for Poles to find their national identity. It took another generation before the Rodnovery movement really started. But still, never mind. I don't even want to go there, because once I start on the beginning, talking about the beginning of the Rodnovery movement, we will still be there. We will still be here tomorrow and the day after, most probably. But what I really wanted to say is that I find embodying the life of my pre-Christian ancestors, I find it very meaningful in terms of following Slavic Native Faith. Being present in nature, looking at the same sky that guided my ancestors, using the same techniques to count the time, not measure, mind you, as with the time, you never measure it, you can only count it. And I find it, all of that, very meaningful. Of course, I do use a watch, I have to, but I am also aware of where the sun is at different times of the day and at different times of the year. And I'm getting better at telling the time of the day basing on the sun, which I find quite cool. I try to watch the sunrise and the sunset, and as I'm watching it, I try to imagine how it must have felt to believe. Actually, not to believe, but to know for sure, because back then that was the knowledge. So I try to imagine how it must have felt to know for sure that every day the sun makes a decision to get out of the water and to walk up, to climb up the sky. To make this journey every day, sometimes getting up later, sometimes getting up earlier, sometimes taking a shortcut through the lower path, and sometimes taking the whole high road through the sky. And if you see the sun, the God, doing it, it makes it easier for you to do it too. By getting up every day, taking the same path through your house, through your field, through the forest, you are almost following the path of the God himself. But the difference is that you don't know why the God is making the choice to follow his path, but you do know why you follow yours. You follow your path to better your family. Sometimes just to give your family one more day or one more chance to survive. But sometimes you do it to build something lasting, something important, something that will be remembered through generations. So when I look at the sky, and I make an effort to look at the sky in a meaningful way every day, and when I look at the sky that my ancestors thought was a dome on which the sun and the moon and the stars were walking, climbing, living and dying, and I look at the sky and I tell my ancestors, I remember you. I remember what you thought. I remember how you saw through your eyes. I cannot live in the world in which you lived because that world does not exist anymore. But I remember. And I will never forget. And I will most certainly not let the stupid, attention-seeking morons, I will not let them destroy what you, my ancestors, what you have built to last. And this is what the third season of Searching for the Slavic Soul is about. It's about making sure that what our ancestors build, that it will last. It will not be soiled by the consumption-oriented, AI-driven, stupid folklore. So, if you want to follow the path of the Slavs, do get off the stupid r/Rodnovery subreddit. Get out of the moronic Facebook groups and go outside to look at the sky, to count the time that lives and dies up there. And I will speak to you in a month, in one moon, in the next episode, which will be about knowledge of the nature, understanding of the feelings, and, if there is enough time, about counting. Till next time, Sława.